You skipped this. You didn't even show this. And you didn't even show this. I mean, come on. But anyway, alright, hey guys, so I just saw the live action version of one of the most iconic and possibly longest running manga series and anime series of all time, One Piece. And before I get to the main meat of the review, I do want to give an explanation. So, as a little bit of my backstory of how I got into the series. So yes, as time, I did technically grew up with the 4Kids version and the very, very corny but still catchy 4Kids One Piece rap. You know, I understand that it kind of has its place in One Piece history in America because it was our introduction to the series, even though I had no idea the translation was off and a lot of what was in the original story wasn't there. And yeah, they butchered it very, very, you know, very big, you know, all the censorships and shit. Yeah, I remember all of it. I just didn't recognize it when I was a kid. When I saw it in 4Kids, I did not realize what they did to the series at all. So yeah, that's kind of a thing. That's kind of a thing. But obviously, eventually, Funimation, now Crunchyroll, now has the rights to One Piece. And so yeah, everything is, you know, fine now. The translations are more closer to the original source material. They have an incredible dub cast. And yeah, that's the version that I've been currently seeing. But, you know, currently, I mean, I think I've said this in a bunch of my previous videos on One Piece when I did my review of One Piece Film Red. I did say that I'm on the Dressrosa arc, and I haven't continued at all. I mean, I've been reading and watching other, and like reading manga, watching anime, and obviously Life. You know, I haven't managed to catch up, and I know about a whole Gear 5 Luffy thing, but I know what his design looks like, but I haven't watched any of the episodes, haven't read the manga about it, I haven't not catched up as much as everyone else has, or maybe everyone else is still starting One Piece and everything like that, but yeah. Just letting you know that. Right now, my standpoint on One Piece, I'm only on the Dressrosa arc. I completely understand that fans right now are on the Wano arc, and I respect that. You know, they're doing so well. So now let's also get into the point of the live action series. So when there was already news that the live-action One Piece series was going to be a thing. Even before Netflix showed its trailers, there were many articles and even announcements from Eiichiro Oda himself that he was working with the team who did House of Cards, except for David Fincher, who was a big part of House of Cards, but yeah, without David Fincher, he's not involved, but most of the writers, directors of House of Cards are working on this series, especially. And so yeah, as soon as that news happened, everyone went insane. Everyone went bonkers. I mean, you couldn't escape the hatred that everyone was saying, like, oh no, One Piece, a live action series, oh no, anime is doomed to repeat itself. You know, obviously we've had so many shitty adaptations with only a few exceptions of like a good amount of, you know, One Piece, you know, I mean, a good amount of anime adaptations turned to live action. Robert Rodriguez did a good job. Even Japan kind of did a good job with Rurouni Kenshin and Bleach. So yeah, that's pretty good. So now we get into the live action series. When people saw the first trailer, surprisingly, the trailers were actually good. They were good trailers, but here's the thing, most people were still skeptical. There was, even for me, I was dreading, like, at everything, because like I said, I am kind of a big One Piece fan. However, I'm not as deep as like the whole world building thing, but I do respect it. I love the characters, I love the story, the emotions, just the fights and everything to the original manga, and I have a soft spot for the anime, even though it has its own problems and a lot of the filler. But yeah, so what I had to do, I just had to, as soon as the Netflix One Piece premiered, I just sat down and I watched it. And all I have to say is, it's good. Yeah, I'm not gonna go on a whole like thing. You're thinking like, oh, it's one of the greatest things in the world. I mean, technically the manga is still better. Even the manga is still better than the anime because of how well written it is and just like the overall story and everything like that. So that's just kind of how I feel about it. So yeah, the live action version of One Piece is good. Nothing great, but good. There are things I like about it. There are things I dislike about it. So let's just get to the whole thing. So I don't think I have to repeat what the story of One Piece is, but just to give the most small version of it. I understand you can pretty much get it out of the theme song, but so yeah, Monkey D. Luffy wants to become king of the pirates after being inspired by Red Hair Shanks, and now he's off to the world, basically searching for a crew and trying to get a bounty in order to become king of the pirates and also find the One Piece. That's basically, you know, the main story of the series. He meets a bunch of colorful characters, even some like very other pirates who he battles to the death, and yeah, it's pretty much a mixture of both comedy, action, drama, a good amount, a really good, well-written drama. So now we get this live action series who, honestly, a lot of people wonder if it's going to be as accurate as the original story. So all I have to say is, for example, we get the introduction in this live action version, we kind of get the introduction of Gold D. Roger, basically the same kind of the same kind of thing, where we also kind of open up, kind of like the opening of the series, where it's just Gold Roger, the king of the pirates, contain this and everything else the world has ever imagined, and his dying words will, you know, sound in countless lives around the world and stuff, you know, just getting the whole feel of the whole thing. And it's just, they changed a few lines, you know, they still call, for some odd reason, instead of him, because in the original story he called it One Place, he left it all in one place, but in this series they still call it One Piece. You know, he left it all in something called One Piece, and then of course he gets executed, and then every pirate in the world goes and tries to find the One Piece treasure, and then years go by and we get introduced to Luffy. And so here's the thing. There's differences between the anime, obviously, and the original story. They're all different adaptations of the original manga. So in the original manga, which of course, just to have a verification, I have right here. So yeah, in the original manga, it kind of basically, yes, it opens up pretty much the same. However, it's a little bit different. For example, it actually does open up with Luffy's backstory, you know, first until he reaches, you know, the pirates and until, you know, he grows up, you know, he meets Shanks and everything like that. But yeah, that's kind of how it opens up, with Luffy's origin story first before he heads into the sea. However, in the anime adaptation, it opens up, well, where he's landed on Elvira's ship, you know, Alvida, sorry. It's just because, you know, they kind of confuse those two. He lands on Alvida's ship and he meets, of course, Kobe in the anime adaptation. However, it's a little different of when you see the, because in the original manga, he actually, you know, like I said, I have the manga here. In the original manga, he basically starts off sailing to become king of the pirates, but he also, in like the opening, he smacks down a giant sea monster and everything. That's kind of how showing you how strong the character is and how determined he is to become king of the pirates. That's basically how it shows. But then, of course, he appears in the barrel. He pops out of the barrel, and and then he meets up with Kobe. And then, of course, he fights the pirate Captain Elvida and stuff. And most of you basically know the story. And the live action version surprisingly opens up differently, which honestly, I understand. Now, I do want to point out, a lot of what the live action version does, it basically follows the same story, but they kind of change a few things. They kind of change of where characters are starting and where characters end. For example, when, you know, how Luffy starts. Luffy starts talking to a random seagull that has, you know, the hat that has like the captain hat and everything like that, and asking to join his crew. Of course, the seagull walks away, and then of course he ends up in the barrel But instead of a pirate crew finding him, it's just Kobe who finds him. It's just Kobe who finds him under the ship, about Alvida's ship, under Alvida's ship, you know, and then it opens up where Luffy is introduced, and of course we have the actor. I am so sorry, I can't remember his name at the life of me at the moment. So yeah, we get this brand new actor who basically, for one thing, Eiichiro Oda, like he did with the dub of One Piece, he actually handpicked the entire cast of this new series, which is pretty fucking awesome. I mean, Eiichiro Oda being the producer of this, executive producer of the series is pretty fucking like, it's pretty, oh man, you would never see this before, but having the original manga writer being an executive producer of the original series of the original series, and you know, having control of his work and having the final say and everything is pretty damn cool, especially knowing it's like being very international. Like, this is an American adaptation that's actually being seen by the original writer from Japan. And it's just like Eiichiro Oda, he's just a very awesome, you know, awesome guy. You know, he's just great. I love his dedication towards that. He wants to hold on to his franchise and he wants to make sure that this is the adaptation that he wants. I really love that about the guy. I haven't met him myself, but he's probably an awesome dude. Yeah, so basically he picked these actors, and honestly, I do have to say the actor who he picked for Luffy pretty much just looks like the character in terms of like his personality and just in a way kind of how he is. Of course, though of course he has curly hair instead of straight hair like in the original story, but he weirdly fits the character too. He weirdly has that charm and understanding of the original character. Except for a few things, but we'll get to that. So, of course, he meets up with Kobe, and of course, he obviously does the same thing he does in the original manga. He beats up the pirate captain. However, there are some things that I get a little bit off of. It's especially not the effects. The effects, surprisingly, in the series, is pretty good. It's not amazing effects, but a lot of people, what people were worrying about in this series was that the effects were going to suck really hard. I mean, the idea that Luffy is supposed to be like Mr. Fantastic in a sense from the Fantastic Four, where he uses his gum powers, you know, stretching and shit, and you know, there's like powers of fire and just overall, you know, and the chop from Buggy the Clown, you know, how are they going to do these effects? Surprisingly, even for Netflix, the effects were pretty good. But here's the thing, like I said, there is an issue, and I want to get to it, but just let me get to the rest. So, how does this series handle the story? And for one thing to mention is that every episode of this series, there's like 8 episodes, which you might think is very short for, you know, a very big series. But you know why they're short? Because every episode's like 50 to an hour long, and I'm just like, okay, I'm for this. I'm just like, because in the original anime, every episode's like 25 minutes. So of course, it's kind of like basing of chapters. Like usually in manga, usually in series based on mangas, they usually take 4 chapters of the original story and add it to the anime and try to do that into one episode. However, in the anime adaptation of One Piece, they only take like 2 chapters, sometimes maybe 1.5, half the time from what I understand from a lot of analysts of One Piece. So yeah, it gets a little clunky, so they add a lot of filler to it. But in this series, they basically take advantage of every part of the story, but also doing something different. And I think that's what this series is. It's not a one-on-one, 100% accurate adaptation of the series, but it does follow the story and understanding and even the spirit of the original One Piece. I think it follows the spirit of One Piece very well. However, I do have some problems. Now, these problems aren't particularly against the actors, maybe except for like one of the actresses actually, the one who plays Nami. I particularly am not a fan of what she did of her performance as the character. Not to say that she's bad. There are a bunch of good moments where she does act, especially during one of the most iconic moments in Arlong Park. If any One Piece fan knows what it is, not wanting to spoil it for anyone else, if you know that scene of Luffy and Nami in that iconic moment in Arlong Park, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I was surprised of how well it still has the emotion, it still has the all the great stuff from it. I really do like that. I like that some of the emotional scenes that was from the original series is intact, and like the actors are giving it their all on this. But like I said, I do have problems. So one of the few problems that I've noticed about the series is that Luffy in this series is weaker compared to the original manga. Now, he's still really strong. It's kind of the same issue I have with the MCU characters, how their strengths and their weaknesses are kind of like out of balance in certain areas compared to the original story, but Luffy in particular, it's not so bad that, it just betrays the original character's strength. It's more of the factor that it's inconsistent in certain areas. For example, when she's taking down a bunch of the captains, such as Captain Buggy, or, the butler from, from Usopp's, story arc, he obviously has the strength that he has from the original story, and he takes them down. He takes them down in the original story. Like, when he takes down all of the villains from the original story, he has the strength that he has from the original story. However, the main problem I have is that sometimes it's inconsistent. For some odd reason, there's a scene in the live action version where, like I said, they changed it a little bit, where Buggy the Clown, instead of meeting him in the town, meeting him in the town like in the original story, for some odd reason, Buggy the Clown uses like this gas smoke that basically, like the smoke that makes them go to sleep, and they capture them on their own boat. And for some odd reason, Buggy has this like big circus. If you've seen it in the trailers, he has this big circus, and Buggy in this version is more freaky and scary, and also kind of like more intimidating compared to the original Buggy. I mean, Buggy's supposed to be funny in the original story, but he's also kind of intimidating. But in this series, he's fucking terrifying half the time. Not only with his design, but just the way he's doing. I mean, he basically kidnapped the entire town, was planning on killing a child in this version, and I'm just like, okay, this is way different. But also, he's kind of a scumbag, or he's just a guy who just wants attention. He just wants attention and everything like that, compared to like the original, which did want attention, but he basically had a different type of different way of doing things. For example, if anyone knows from the original story, that Red Hair Shanks and Buggy the Clown were originally, Goldie Roger's crew. Were original Goldie Roger's crew when they were young. So they already know what the One Piece, they know what the One Piece is, and they don't care about it. So why in this version does Buggy want to be king of the pirates and want that One Piece treasure? He doesn't care about the One Piece treasure. So yeah, that's just a few things that are different. I'm not going to go over the entire difference, but these are the ones that kind of bother me, wondering where they're going to go if they decide to make another season of this. And a lot of people you're probably asking, like, okay, well, what's the pacing in the show? How well is the pacing in the show? The pacing in the show is actually very well made. It's actually pretty good, but there are some areas where I feel like they kind of speed through a bunch of things, like characters either get axed off before it happens, and then characters from later arcs somehow appear here. For example, if you've seen the trailers, Luffy's grandfather is in this story. Luffy's grandfather is in this, and I'm just like, wait, he doesn't come until like way later in the Water 7 arc, and even later than that. I'm just like, what on earth is he doing here? But in a way, they're trying to add their own spin on the One Piece story. For example, one thing that bugged me a little bit, very, very small, was the relationship between Luffy and Kobe. If you've read the original story or have watched the anime version, their relationship, basically they're good friends, and they start out as good friends, but then what happened is that Luffy basically knows that Kobe wants to be part of the Marines, and he respects that. But then, of course, then one of the Marines finds out after after they dealt with Don Krieg, and after saving Zoro. So one of the Marines finds Luffy, Zoro, and Kobe in a small restaurant. Now, in this scene, Luffy tries to obviously just pretend like Kobe doesn't exist so he can join the Marines, but of course the Marines thinks that Kobe is part of their group, so they ask questions. So then Luffy tries to explain to him about what happened to him and how he was basically a slave to Captain Alvida and stuff, but then of course Kobe doesn't want him to know that he has pirate, blood on him, or, relating, being friends with pirates. So he punches Luffy in the original story. He punches Luffy, telling him to shut up, only to Luffy beat the shit out of him, showing that clearly they're not friends, trying to get him to know that, even though they're friends, in secret, they basically still keep their friendship, but they respect each other's dreams of Kobe wanting to be head Marine, and that was the thing. That kind of has like a very, very strong friendship, because it shows that even though he beat him up, he did it just to show that he can be part of the Marines, just so the Marines don't suspect that he's friends with pirates. And that was so good about the original story. And of course they accept him in, the original story, and of course he says goodbye to Luffy, saluting him to say goodbye and hope to meet him one day, but eventually capture him one day. But that's how their friendship works, and that's how well. And even he comes back later on in the story, and he becomes a completely different person, still friends with Luffy. Like I said, that's the relationship between Luffy and Kobe. In here, it's a little different for some odd reason. Like, for some odd reason, they kind of remove the whole Marine seeing Kobe scene. They still save Zoro, but then, and also Nami is with them, and everything. And Nami's with them very early on in this version. And then, for some odd, for some odd reason, in this version, Kobe, has a chance. Luffy still thinks that Kobe's going to keep going with him, and maybe he'll follow his dream as a Marine. But then, of course, Kobe decides, no, I'm not going with you. I want to have my dream. Like, for some odd reason, it's more of because there's no Marines in this version. It's more that they just follow their friendship and decide to leave and wants to join the Marines, so he finds the Marines afterwards, even though he was right there and he escaped from the Marines, so it's kind of weird. And yeah, he just says goodbye to Luffy, and I feel that Kobe has much more in this version compared, and also I think a lot of people online have talked about Helmeppo in this version. Like, it's a little different. For example, he kind of has more beef with Zoro in this version compared to the original, where he was kind of one-off until eventually he came back and became Kobe's best friend. Well, not really best friend, more like, partner and stuff. But the difference here is that Helmeppo, he instead of him having the goofy haircut like he has in the original anime, he has like this long hair, which he does get later, which is weird. But then, of course, Zoro, in this very awkward scene of him being in his room and trying to make him look cool in the store because he took one of Zoro's swords. Zoro comes into the room and then beats the shit out of him, and not only that, he ends up cutting his hair that makes him look like the hairstyle of the anime, which I'm just like, okay, that's kind of funny. That's kind of a little cool Easter egg right there. But then eventually, because of, Helmeppo's, ignorance of basically not being able to watch over Zoro and just, basically being an idiot, he, of course, joins the Marines with Kobe. And then, of course, we get introduced to Garp, which is ridiculous. And yeah, the crew already knows that Luffy, now in this, like I said, it's really early on, they now know that Garp is Luffy's grandfather. I'm just like I said, I'm just like, wait, why is it so early? Like, why are we doing this earlier? And I was just like, what do they plan on doing here? What do they plan on doing? And also, the grandfather's, really different compared to, he's still a hardhead, but he's a much more nicer person compared to the original story. Like I said, there's these few changes that actually pretty work, but then there's few changes that don't work. And like I said, it's kind of all over the place with me. Like I said, there are things that work and things that don't work. Now, So yeah, they do follow the story basically scene by scene by scene. They put in the most important iconic scenes, they put in the more good scene. But then of course the one thing that I think I have a major flaw with this series is that a lot of the characters that would eventually come in later either get axed off or they're just not as important. One thing that really, for example, when Usopp's love interest in this version, which I'm not a fan of the actress. She does a great job, but I'm just not a fan. I don't think she looks like the character. So yeah, Usopp's relationship with this, with of course the character that he's kind of has a good friendship with in his town. The butler, if you remember, the butler character is supposed to be the evil villain, but then she also has her fatherly figure assistant, who's like the sheep. Who's like the sheep kind of look. In the original story, he gets beat up by the captain of the cat burglar pirates. That's what it was, the cat burglar pirates. Yeah. Sorry, it's just because it's been a long time since I've seen the original series. So yeah, he gets beat up by the cat burglar pirate, but he doesn't die. However, in this version, he does die, which is weird because he's still around in the later story. You see him in the later parts of the stories in One Piece because he's kind of like a central character who's a father figure to, of course, Usopp's love interest in the story. And I'm just like, why did they kill him off in this version? And also, they kind of changed a few things where instead of having the cat burglar pirate captain having an entire crew, it's only 2 people. So I'm just like, but wait, but these 2 people are like really strong. And like I said, there's just these things that like are different that honestly are good differences. Like, for example, I do like the fact that we get to meet Sanji kind of in the best point of view. Instead of meeting Sanji, how we met him in the original story, it's more. I also like the fact that they changed a little bit of things. Like, for example, Zeph, who happens to be Sanji's father figure in this, and Cook, basically, in this version, instead of him liking his food, he doesn't like his food and think that he's being too ambitious about his food and thinking that they should just follow regular food, which would not be in the original show. It's more of the fact that Sanji's kind of a maniac. He's kind of crazy. He's like in this, in the original, like in the new story, they think that's, he's kind of crazy being a waiter and stuff and not understanding how to respect the staff, a bunch of, the customers because, like I said, there's that scene where one of the customers basically tries to start, an argument and fight because he's a rich douche and stuff like that. So Sanji kind of beats the shit out of him and causes a ruckus and everything. And then, it recognizes the whole point that the entire barista is more like a pirate ship instead of like a fancy ass restaurant. That's kind of what was in the original story, but in this version it's more that Sanji is kind of not like he's not good at cooking, as they say, but of course Luffy comes in and saying that no, he's a really great cook. They do the all blue story. And yeah, speaking of backstories, I think compared to everyone, so they even kind of mixture of where the stories. For example, in Usopp's arc, they put Zoro's backstory right there instead of having it before the arc happens, even though that was in the original. They put his backstory right afterwards. So yeah, they put backstories of characters in different types of places and different types of times compared to the original story. Like I said, they're following the main story, but they're adding things that are, different but good, but then they're also removing things that were in the original story and they don't add up. Why would you do that? I think that's just the issue that I have with the live action version. It's not like I want it to be 100% accurate. I want it to be different. I want it to, try to do something unique and new. And it does that, but it does that in a way sometimes that is confusing, but also kind of off in certain areas. I also feel that, like I said, back to the actress who plays Nami, it's not that she's a bad actress. I think that probably she's a really great actress, but I haven't seen her in anything else but other than this series. And but I do think that she is possibly a great actress. She definitely does that one iconic scene well and a few other scenes well, but then there are times where I feel like she doesn't give a shit about what she's saying out of her mouth. Because, like, you know how in the trailer, like, she's talking about the Mac is like, oh, stretch of ocean. And also, she doesn't get. The problem that I have is that I understand that because it's live action, they kind of have to add more realism to the whole point of people talking instead of having it very cartoony. But if you remember the character Nami, yeah, she's cool and calm in certain areas when it comes to following the map, trying to figure out some plans and everything like that. But when it comes to her and her reaction to Luffy, like when Luffy does something stupid or Luffy does something crazy, she goes mad insane or mad kind of like Luffy, you know, like Luffy, like, you know, that kind of stuff, you know. But for some odd reason in this version, she's like super cold in this. Like, and every time she tries to get angry at Luffy, it's just like, you can't do that, you know. Like, there's this scene where, surprisingly, in this version, which I really actually do like, where Zoro fights you know, one of the greatest, like the greatest swordsman in the world. He fights him off, and of course he loses the battle. And you know how in that version, Nami kind of, you know, leaves before the battle happens because she doesn't want to get involved with them anymore. Of course, she has to go back to Arlong. But in this version, she actually stays with them, which honestly I think is kind of awesome. I think it kind of shows their friendship a little bit more than it does in the original. It does in the original, which is pretty a pretty good change, honestly. I really do like that change. But then of course when Zoro feels like he's not going to make it out of it because he got injured so much from the sword, from the giant, you know, metallic sword, Luffy and Nami are arguing over if Zoro's going to be okay. Why on earth did Luffy let him fight, you know, and stuff, and Nami tries to get mad. But the thing is, when she gets mad, it's not the mad Nami that you know. You know how Nami is like really yelling and stuff? But like in this one, she's just like, Luffy, why'd you do this? You know, you can't do this. And of course, Luffy being, you know, kind of simple-minded in this version, but also kind of different too. Let me get back to that one. But then at the same time, like, Luffy's like being like, this actor is clearly doing his hardest being this character, doing it well, but then the actress who plays Nami is clearly trying her best, but she's just not reaching that whole anger that Nami had in the original story. I feel like she does Nami justice in being a burglar and trying to come up with the schemes, but also becoming a good navigator. I like that character of her in the original story, and she definitely follows it here, but she definitely doesn't get the emotional anger like Nami does, or the crazy funny anger that Nami does. I do hope they fix that later. I really do. So back to Luffy. So, like I said, I really love the actor who plays Luffy, but there is a thing that I feel is different from the original story, but it kind of almost feels off character in certain areas. For example, in the scene where they're trying to steal the Grand Line map from of course the Marines, they're in this basement, and of course Luffy finds Nami, and then at first you think like, oh, so of course because Nami's in disguise as, you know, Marine, so she's trying to steal the map. But then of course Luffy's just like, you're not a Marine, you're a burglar. I'm just like, wait, how did he catch all that? Like, and she's like, no, I'm not. And then, like, she feels really convincing, but for some odd reason, Luffy figures out everything, which is not the original character at all. Luffy is not smart. He also comes up with strategies in this version. He also tries to speak sense in this version. I'm just like, okay, Luffy speaks sense in the original, but more in a kind of simpleton way, more of a simple type of way, because he's all about the meat, which he is in the original, in this live action version too, but then he's thinking about plans. He's also knows when someone's lying, and I'm just like, are you okay? This is really off character, but weirdly it doesn't ruin anything. Like I said, it doesn't ruin anything, but it's kind of like, for example, if Tsukasa from Lucky Stars was just as smart as his sister Kagami from Lucky Stars. It's just like, imagine if Tsukasa was just as smart as his sister. It kind of would take away the characters and what they, like, the sisterly relationship that they represent. Like, it just takes away that kind of character depth that you liked in the original series. So that's just a thing that I kind of feel off about Luffy. But like I said, love the actors. Oh man, Zoro. Oh, and the guy who plays Zoro, he is everything about Zoro except for the little kid who did his backstory. The little kid surprisingly did very well in certain areas, but then other areas he was kind of off. Okay, and just to end here, so while I do like this series of what it's doing, I really don't like where they add the whole backstories and where they place them into the show. Sometimes it's just like the original series in the manga, but then they also place them differently. For example, Luffy's backstory is kind of spread throughout the entire show, even though it was only one scene in the entire manga. Especially in the beginning it was in the manga, but then later on, of course, Luffy told Kobe about his backstory and everything, in the backstory in that in the, you know, the anime and the original manga. But then, of course in the manga it was, the beginning of the manga, but like I said, they moved it around in certain areas. And then Zoro's story comes in a very odd time, but it works surprisingly, except the backstory is not as good, not as strong as it's supposed to be, but it's still pretty fine. And then we get Usopp's backstory, which, is pretty much the same, but I felt like the kid who played Usopp was like a much better actor in terms of like how sad he was, but kind of not. Like I said, they kind of do a lot of different things. And then Nami's back, and then we get Sanji's backstory, which in my opinion, that is the best one of the bunch. That is where it feels like the original story. It feels like the emotion. And honestly, the actors who played the young kid who played the young Sanji and the actor who played Zeph, oh, so good, so great. It felt like the original story. It kept like the spirit of the original story. It was just a good. Even though the island was different in the original, the deserted island is different from the original, but it matched the original understanding and spirit of the original One Piece. That was pretty good. But then we also get to Nami's backstory, and once again, it's a little different, and they also changed things. For example, Nami's a little girl in the live-action version, even though she started out as a baby when of course her adopted mother, saved her and saved her sister, just like saved, Nami's kind of a non-blood related stepsister. It's sorry if I'm mumbling a little bit. But yeah, that's just a thing. But yeah, like I said, the backstories are done well, but then certain areas it's not done well, certain areas it is done well. I feel like the live action version, it's definitely keeps the spirit and definitely does something different enough that honestly, by the end, I honestly thought it was a solid effort to the original story. It definitely was better than most people expected, which, is pretty high standard right there. I do want to say this. After watching the first season, I actually would like a season 2. But I'm hoping that they change, like they get a better director or better, better people to write certain episodes. Like I said, I feel like if they written it better, that would actually be good, but they still would understand what the first season was at least. Like I said, I really think this is a solid adaptation. I think it's like a solid B. I think it's a solid B. It's nothing, obviously it's not as good as like the original manga, but I can say that in certain areas it is definitely better in terms of like if you're going back to the original series, the anime and stuff. It is definitely better in certain areas. Cutting all the fat, cutting all the filler parts, and only putting like the most important parts, or at least the extra parts that need to be there and stuff. That's what I like. That's what I personally like that this series did. But they also did something different and unique, and surprisingly it worked. But yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about it. I can't say that I'm the biggest expert into the whole thing. I mean, like I said, I really enjoy this series, and I'm glad that the live action version does so well that I'm actually expecting them to get a season 2. I hope they get a season 2, and surprisingly the series doing well in viewership, and a lot of people are watching it, so I'm hoping that a lot of people will support it so we can get more good live action anime / manga adaptations of a lot of other famous shows like why don't we do Lucky Star? Like I said, I just mentioned before. Actually, that sounds like a great idea. And hopefully, maybe Netflix can try Dragon Ball. And if we get the same type of people who did this series, maybe we'll also get a really good one. I don't know. But honestly, I really do like it. I do like, I'm not saying it's great, but it is a solid effort. The series is pretty solid. These directors and writers put their all into it. And thank you, Eiichiro Oda. And yeah. So yeah, Roger D. Star signing out. And I'll see you next time, my One Piece, One Piece crew.